It's an important lesson to remember what it takes, actually, to get to freedom. How many of us have ancestors that had to cross a river or an ocean or huge amounts of land, and many, many immigration officials and borders along the way? We can't take it for granted. And of course, we have continued to argue all along the way. Until this very moment, we have been characterized as a am kshei oref, a people who have a stiff neck, which of course the joke is that's why our necks are like this. Jews have such, anyway. In this week's Torah portion, we also have probably one of the biggest arguments of the entire Torah, and it is the infamous Torah portion of Korach. Raise your hand if you think you remember the story more or less. Korach and his gang come to be known as those terrible people who had the gall to plan a rebellion against Moses and Aaron. And they actually say, Korach and his gang actually say to Moses and Aaron, like, who made you so great? Who made you the one who could have power and tell us when to go and when to stop and which way to travel around through the desert? And it turns into becoming such a deep and powerful schism that eventually what happens to them, those who had the gall to rise up against Moses and Aaron and Miriam? Jill, you remember? Literally the ground opens up, like splits open. And it's actually a very unique word. It only has occurred one other time in the Bible until this point. And it swallows them up. At that point in our people's story, we could handle debate, but we also needed some kind of unity. So the rabbis teach us in all of the commentaries over the centuries. There have been so many different commentaries. Most of the commentaries use Korach to say, use this Torah portion, this case to say, these are the ways you shouldn't argue. If you have bad intentions, this is the main thing that seems to be applied to them. If you have bad intentions, then your protest will have no future. If your intentions are only to divide and to bring somebody else down, which it seems pretty clear thereafter, taking Moses and Aaron down, if that's your goal, then that machloket, right, is a machloket that will have no future. That debate, the rabbis tell us in the Mishnah, is a debate that is lo l'shem shamayim. It's not for the sake of heaven. So we can tolerate so many kinds of debates, but if it's not for the sake of heaven, it's not going to exist anymore. And we'll talk in a minute about what happens to those debates that cannot possibly be tolerated. And then there's the kind of debates that we celebrate. There are hundreds, thousands of debates throughout the Talmud. In fact, you could say that the 27 volumes, 27 plus volumes of the Talmud, you've seen a whole set of Talmud? Anybody? Yes? Right? It takes up several shelves. It's filled with rabbis and other people, actually Jews and sometimes Greek philosophers and other people, just arguing with each other about every little thing. That's why we became such good lawyers, right, Newt? That's why we became such great lawyers. We have been perfecting this art of arguing every possible point of every possible angle, of every possible argument. In fact, the greatest rabbis are known to have been able to find to every argument, at least Reish Lakish was able to find at least 24 counter-arguments to any argument that his Chavruta, his senior study partner, would propose. 24 counter-arguments. So much so that when he dies, when the younger Chavruta study partner rabbi dies, the older rabbi says, I can't exist anymore. Who is going to propose all of these counter-arguments to everything? How will I continue to learn if there isn't somebody bringing a counter-argument? So we're not afraid of arguments. Oh, by the way, it's that famous rabbi that comes up with the famous line, which is, O chavruta, o mituta, which means, give me liberty or give me death. No, it means give me a chavruta, give me a good study partner, someone who will counter every argument, otherwise I'd rather die. That's how much argument is so important. And so they develop and come to celebrate the arguments between who are the two main characters in the Mishnah and throughout the Talmud that argue every point. Hillel and Shammai, right? They're the ones who argue whether the mezuzah should be put like this or like this on a doorpost. And so what do? How do we put the mezuzah? Right, at an angle, a compromise. They argued about whether we should start lighting the Hanukkah menorah with a full 8 and then take it down to 1, or we should take it from 1 and light it up to 8. The second one was Hillel. Guess who won that argument? Hillel. We light it from 1 to 8. But can't you see the justice in the argument of saying that clearly that what do we call the thing that held the oil? The kad shemen, in the temple, the story of Hanukkah, the jar. Rabbi Herman, what is it called? The oil is kept in the temple that it was kept in. It was full at the beginning. The miracle, thank you, the cruse of oil. The miracle isn't that the first night, right? The miracle is that at the end of the holiday, right, there was still some left for it to keep going more than one night. So shouldn't you start at 8 when the cruse is full of oil and light 8, 7, 6? Shouldn't you? Can you see the validity of that argument? It's hard to imagine, but can't you see the validity of it? So the rabbis say that those are the good arguments. The good arguments are Hillel and Shammai, because why? Their arguments were for l'shem shemaim, for a good purpose. When you're in the argument, though, has anybody ever argued with their spouse? No? It's your anniversary. You've never argued. But if we think about our arguments, I don't know, have you guys been married long enough for this to be true? Yeah, you can have most arguments, I mean, really, who cares which restaurant you go to for dinner? And I'll just share, I think you might be online, but I mean, really, did it matter whether we followed Waze home or Apple's map? Did it really matter? I mean, it mattered a lot in the moment because there was a half-hour difference. And then, of course, every time we, talked about it and argued about it, it was showing us a different time frame. I just knew that I needed to be here by 6:15. But does it really matter in the great scheme of things? Does it really matter? But the goal of Hillel and Shammai was to make Judaism better. And the goal of Korach and his gang was to just tear down the leadership. So the question is, are you arguing to try to create a good argument is because you're trying to create something better. And those arguments, the Mishnah tells us, those will endure. Those will lead to something good. But how many of you have heard that commentary about the two different kinds of arguments? You've heard it probably every time that this Torah portion comes up. But this week I also learned a new commentary that I want to share with you, and share with you what these two different ways of thinking about it lead me to want to say at this moment. A different commentator, based on the teaching of a contemporary colleague, Rabbi David Kasher, he says that actually, at the core of the Korach and Moses debate is not as much about who should be the leader and trying to destroy one or the other, but at the core of it, they got to that point because at the core of it was that Korach couldn't let go of the fact that he wasn't chosen to be second in command. That in the family lineage, according to the Midrash, he should have been in Aaron's role. And instead of accepting the fact that somebody else was appointed for the role, instead of, I might say, accepting the fact that somebody else won the election, what did Korach do? He tried to destroy the whole thing. Another set of texts based on a more Kabbalistic, mystical idea from Rabbi Chaim Vital teaches that actually this goes not just back to when they were appointed, that there's this grudge of anger that Korach can't let go of and can't accept reality, but actually they each represent something from the very beginning of humanity, which is Cain and Abel. because of the two scenarios, similarities between the two scenarios. This is what this commentator says. And it uses, Jill, the commonality is that same word about the earth opening up is used only in these two places. In the Cain and Abel story, you remember what happens? Again, isn't it? One is chosen over the other. And how does that story end? With fratricide, with the first civil war, really. Because what is civil war? It's a war between brothers. So Cain kills Abel. Why? Why? Because he too couldn't accept that God had chosen Abel's sacrifice over his. So the parallel is in each story, somebody's not able to accept reality, not able to carry forward, not able to support the system that could have allowed all of them to live if they'd been able to engage in dialogue and be able to work together. So it seems to me that these two very different ways of looking at it are, one, about the Hillel and Shammai versus Korach and Moses. It's about a style of argument and a purpose of the argument. The other set of commentaries, it seems to me, that is really looking at how each set of characters are dealing with trauma, with something that happened so long ago that they haven't been able to transcend it, and they haven't been able to transcend it together. And of course, you can apply this to your own life. Where are we still dealing, each of us, with an inner Korach that just won't let go of something? You could apply it to a community. You could apply it to a country. You could apply it to nations, right? How can we ensure that in the story of our lives, we are choosing to be more like Moses, more like Hillel and Shammai, and more like Abel in each of our stories? It seems that the Bible keeps bringing us back to these narratives to try to show us that so much of the experience of our own lives and so much of our own contemporary reality in our relationships and in our families has to do with how we approach disagreement, how we approach the past, how we deal with our own trauma, how we deal with a situation that we don't think should be as it is, but it is. Can we live in the here and now and engage in discussions and disagreements that are constructive and that lead us to a better future? And if we're able to do that, then I think we might be worthy, as ultimately Moses and Aaron and Miriam were able to lead us. We can lead ourselves to the promised land of the future that we dream of the future that we deserve as individuals and as a country and as a people. Shabbat Shalom.